Bath is.
Yeah, don't. What my one I did here.
Yeah, a couple things I heard in Bath, just mind boggling.
All right, we're live, so we'll move on to the so thank you for coming. Tonight is basically an educational session to talk about Brunswick, no, we're not talking about Brunswick, talk about Topsham's TIFs. TIFs in general and Topsham. And I've got Justin here. He helped with some of the data for the presentation, and he's here to keep me honest and let me know if I go off on a wayward. As far as your handouts, I'll explain them when we get there, but probably the most important one to start with is this notes pages that have each slide, and a place you can take those sides. And then when we get to the other handouts, I'll explain them to you. So some of you may already know this, but we'll kind of start with beginnings of what a TIF is. So TIFs were created by the legislature back in the mid-70s, and it was intended as an economic development tool. So it was to help provide new employment or give municipalities and other people or other organizations that might use them, say some unauthorized territory or something. It was a chance to provide for new employment, broaden your tax base, and improve the general economy of the municipality. We have a TIF policy that was passed by the select board back in 2001, and according to that, the reason for the TIFs was to provide financial incentives in support of economic development projects that increase the town's public or private industry. And then an example of one that helped pay for infrastructure was our interchange TIF. Usually, most of our TIFs have numbers, so in this presentation, the numbers will get used quite often. But this is TIF number 6, help pay for the Monument Avenue debt service when that was created between Topsham and Brimwell, Main Street. So if you have a TIF, here's what's different from, say, the regular tax. So if you have a TIF, the valuation of the property in the district gets locked in to what it was when it was created. So for instance, the recent TIF is the one for the affordable housing Tedford Road called the Acton TIF. So that one, the value right now is locked in with basically the raw land. So then any increase in value over the raw land, once they finish the building and Justin figures out how much he's going to assess it at, gets not counted for the purposes of determining municipal revenue sharing from the state, education aid, and our share of the county taxes. So the property that we have in TIFs that we're using the TIF for shifts a little bit of our county tax burden onto Bath, which are upset other places. If we didn't have the property in a TIF and we weren't sheltering the money, we would have a greater share of the county tax. The state education aid formula uses a combination of valuation of students and things. So the lower our valuation, the more state education aid we can get to help pay for 75. And same thing for municipal revenue share. Gets impacted by the town's valuation. So the taxes, the property in the TIF gives us a little bit of benefit, theoretically at least a little more aid and a little less county tax. Once done.
So both Bath and Brunswick have that same opportunity.
Right. So, and that's the point Justin kind of makes, is if everyone's got all these TIFs, maybe I'm really shifting much of anything. It's ends up getting about the same money we would have gotten otherwise.
Do you remember how many TIFs along that spreadsheet in DCD? It's like 300 plus.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Mark, can you describe how a TIF works? I mean, is it just somebody gets to build it? Where do the funds come from? How do you apply for funds? Every time we talk about TIFs, I just want to wrap my head around.
And future slides will do that.
Okay.
As we go.
Okay.
So the value of the property is locked in on whatever it was the TIF was created. And we'll talk about how they're created in some of the future slides and things. And then as the property increases in value, the taxes that are raised from that increase go to whatever the developer in the town has negotiated. So there's something called a credit enhancement agreement. that would be negotiated between town and developer. You know, in some cases, it says we give back, usually if there's a developer involved, in pretty much all cases, we give a portion of the money from the TIF back to the developer to help pay for the project. The town share, we'll come to later some slides to talk about what we can use it for, but the town share can be used for specific things, but not just anything. Topsham got in trouble with Maine revenue back in the late 00s, because Topsham was kind of maximizing all its TIFs, taking all the money it could, but then it wasn't necessarily following the approved purposes. So someone was going to pay for general budget things. So Maine revenue ended up coming back to the town and saying you were using this wrong, and the town had to pay some penalties and stuff.
2008, I had to testify before the state legislature.
Okay, wasn't that fun? So the town share goes for however it's been negotiated in this agreement. And then that agreement also gets approved by the State Department of Economic Community Development. The town share could be used for economic development, like in the past, would fund like John Shattuck's salary. In the process, we're gonna use some of it to fund Jeff and my salaries because we're doing some of the economic development stuff that was done before things. It can also be used, and later on we'll cover this spreadsheet, but it can be used for things like we talked about, it was used to help pay for Monument Place. A portion of one of the TIFs pays for some of the expenses of the fire department trucks and things, is what's happened in the past. There's also a variation of a TIF called a municipal TIF that doesn't have a developer. It's the town uses it for public infrastructure. And the one that actually paid for the Monument Place is a municipal, much of Topsham from all road areas of this municipal TIF that paid for Monument Place. It also can pay for, say, we want to decide, one of the things we're looking at is some sidewalks on Park Drive. This possibly some other sources of money for it too, but one could be the TIF that we've got, the municipal interchange TIF. Can also pay for water and sewer work out there. One other thing from the Highlands Credit Enhancement Agreement, that one contemplated, and they paid us $400,000 that goes to help increase pedestrian access from the Highlands and get it bike and pedestrian to get to the bike path. So it could be used, we wanted to build an overpass over the highway for, not that we're recommending that, to get people across. That money could go towards that, take a lot more than forward that. More relevant may be the state is talking about making this rail trail on the railroad track go along Tedford Road. So we could now say get under the highway rather than over. So it might be able to use that money to help pay for some of our expenses related to that. So connection wouldn't be the one for it's intended, but it'd still be a legitimate plan for that. So the development program is defined by statute, and basically it says the things that you can do and you can't. So with the money, and that has to get approved by the Department of Economic and Community Development, has to be in accordance with their statutes as well as their rules. So in essence, it's the financial plan for the TIF. It describes any public facilities that are going to be financed by the TIF, and describes any commercial activities can be financed by the TIF. And again, it has to be followed. We can't use the funds for other purposes, or we run into trouble with state. So TIFs are governed by the main law that sets them up, also the rules that are developed by the Economic and Community Development. We have our Town of Topsham TIF policy, and actually that date's wrong, it's 2001, not 2021, it was approved. Interesting, in that policy, it said that the usual approved split is 75% town and 25% developer, though it can differ depending on the specifics of the project. You'll see in a later slide that most of our current TIFs have a more of a 50-50 split of things. The policy also had, or has, 12 considerations that are to be applied when determining if the town wants to enter into a TIF. So that's one of your handouts, is the 12 considerations that are in the policy. They include things like, does the TIF goals align with the comprehensive plan? Does it improve a blighted area? Does it help create additional infrastructure improvements outside of just the impact area of the project? You know, you can say that Monument Avenue here benefit the whole town, just the immediate district of the TIF, everyone could get to them all a little easier. So if you want to look at those are the, you've got them, and those are the things in this select board policy that would be considered if we decide we want to TIF or not. So there's some statutory limits on what you can have with TIFs. I think the idea was probably so that you couldn't shift too much of your financial burdens onto other towns of the state in the case of getting extra aid for revenue sharing. Any one district cannot exceed 2% of the acreage of the municipality. And the total of all your TIF districts cannot exceed 5% of the acreage of the municipality. There is an exception to which ones count towards the acreage cap. And there's a type of TIF called the downtown tax increment financing district that doesn't count towards the cap. We do have one of those. And when we go to our map, I'll tell you which one it is, but that one doesn't count towards the acreage cap. And that's our number 9 TIF, doesn't count towards that.
Mark, do we know where we're at?
Total? If you counted the one that doesn't count, like 4.76 roughly %. But if we back that out, which Dustin hasn't had a chance to do yet, but if we back it out, my guess is we're probably between 3 and 4% acreage. That's not fair, Justin.
It does. Yeah, I was gonna.
And then the original assessed value of all the districts cannot exceed 5% of the total value of all taxable property in the municipality. I suspect that one we have a lot more room on, only because assessed values have jumped so much since our TIFs were created, and this is the original assessed value that matters, not the current one. So,
I think the small towns are the problem.
yeah,
I mean, if they want to open a business market, you know, to build a small town, they hit 5%.
right.
Surprised they haven't adjusted.
Well, it's the starting point. So keep in mind that when a TIF is proposed and adopted, the idea from the state was that we projects and parcels that would be otherwise economically feasible to develop. So in theory, even in a small town, you're probably taking a parcel.
It's all original. Right?
Yes,
Okay, yeah.
it's not the development. So as Mark was saying, I mean, some of our OEDs on some of these in the early 90s. Sorry, late 90s, huge difference in their OED versus what it doesn't keep track current value of districts. So as you're setting up, it looks at the original set value. So there's a lot of leeway overall, far in excess of what the OEDs.
Particularly if you kept a running valuation of what that property would be undeveloped throughout the life of the TIF to see the difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many moving parts though, and
Right.
changing.
I'm sure it's huge, but
The one, like the one we did for John Hodge, the housing TIFs, it's just basically one parcel. So, and it's raw land at the time, so it really doesn't contribute much of anything towards the, yeah.
But I think to his point though, because I'm a huge believer in TIFs. Anyhow, each of the towns use their TIFs and everything else. The bottom line is when you start to see what the payback down is in their initial investment in these TIFs, I think it's very big. Just take some of the Highland homes out there, right? And the values of those newer units getting built. And we started this number, right? And now you're putting units in there at this number. And our share of those taxes has increased pretty dramatically.
yeah, the more they build, the more you get.
I totally agree with that. I mean, the more people. Yeah, this we have to. More schools.
Well, the Highlands High School.
Maintenance, it takes an hour to get from Route 1 to this intersection 3 times a day. I mean, there are added costs there. That's not what I will be complaining about. So. Still forgot there. All good. But yeah, so I'm just saying, there are definitely costs. But I guess in this case, we are bringing in quite a bit of tax revenue. So I'm not sure what the balance is there. Cost benefits. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
That's okay. So And our total assessed value right now, this is around 1.8 billion, right?
Oh, taxable value?
Yep.
Yeah, 1.8.
So this differential isn't what matters so much. This it's more the acreage
What was the number, 5%?
of that. Yep. But it's the original assessed value. So some of the things that you're allowed to pay for out of the TIF are cost of improvements made within the district, capital permits, professional fees to get things done. Cost of improvements made outside the district related but made necessary to the district. That's the clause that was used for the fire department support was the Frost Street TIF. So it's one of the ones that's part of the Highlands. Because of the fact, Ian kind of joked, but she's right. It was justified based on increased ambulance and emergency services use that would be caused by the elderly housing. So that supported some of the use of the funds for the fire department things. Costs outside the district, but within the municipality that can fund is economic development programs, environmental improvement, employment training, child and adult care facilities, operation of municipal public safety facilities, although there's a 15% cap, and affordable housing for those whose income is up to 120% of the median income. But it can't fund just anything you want. You have to find things in the particular categories that you can justify. So for TIF expenses to be allowable, they have to be things that are allowed by statute as rule, statute and rule. They have to be things that was in the development program. So if this may be something we could do by statute, but it wasn't in our development program, we'd have to go back to amend our TIF to get things changed. A couple of our TIFs have been amended over the years. And that development program has to be approved by the state, also has to be authorized by the town meeting. And so now, in the spreadsheet in the small font, there's a copy online that can be blown up to look better. Is our analysis of our TIFs, and it says the things that the different ones can be used for. The most interesting one I think of note right now with our current TIFs is the couple of them can help pay for Chetford Road improvements. So as we look for ways to help cover the costs of the culvert and or the sidewalks in Chetford Roads, there's a couple of TIFs here that may be useful to help pay for some of that. So this is our current TIFs and what their expiration dates are. The TIF that's called bypass is also the original Highlands TIF. So it pays for the Highlands on the, say, the south side of the bypass. The Bowden Mill TIF is the one that was set up to help with the Bowden Mill development. That would help pay for the relocation of the library into their new building, among other things. The bypass north TIF, which is, Justin, where exactly is that? Actually,
It's a sucker.
yeah, so I'll bring them out. So those are going to expire within the next few years, the first three. The rest now it's lasting into the 30s and 40s. So we've got 7 TIFs that were used for economic development. And we've got 2 TIFs that were used for affordable housing. So one is the elderly housing complex on Elm Street. That one, it's barely amount. We're out a lot of purposes you can use the money for that one. So that one had a balance that was up to $60,000 or $70,000 in the account. We were able to use that though to help pay for the Elm Street culvert, which was like a $500,000 or $600,000 job. So it was a good use of the money to help pay for that. Then our other housing TIF is the one for the affordable housing in Chetford Road that hasn't actually kicked in yet because it doesn't kick in until the buildings. And those pay for low income families. Right. TIF 11 is the one on Chetford Road. That one has a beautiful purpose it can be used for. Is that one of the lot of purposes is to offset your educational expenses. So it's almost guaranteed that if we've got, I think it's 30 something family apartments, that we're going to be increasing our expenses for the school district. So we can use 100% of our share of the TIF if we want to offset school expenses. So there won't be any money not captured on that TIF. And we'll talk more about capturing it not.
No, so Mark, you got the phase two, in Highland Green. On the downside of phase one, has that expired now? I thought it still had a little.
It expires in 6/30/26. That's the one, the
Oh.
number one.
Okay, I didn't know what it calls bypass.
Yeah, for some reason, it gets called bypass in some places and.
Next year's fiscal year.
Yeah.
So it would be assessment date of April 1st, 2025.
And that one's,
July 25.
I don't remember what it was, but it's down into the 30%.
And as the TIF expires, then the acreage no longer counts towards the total and the original assessed value doesn't count towards that 5%. So this is the one, the color one you've got. This helps show where the TIFs are a little better. So that original Highland one is the one that's orange, kind of in the, just below the bypass, below all the pink. So that's the one that expires in 2026. And the one that is the downtown TIF, so it doesn't count towards the acreage, is the one that's red. So that includes a lot of property along 201, some on Elm Street and places. Some down in Lower Maine that isn't part of the road and mill TIF. The municipal TIF that we can use to pay for, say, water, sewer, and stuff in the Topsham Fair Mall area, that's the green one. On the left, the bright green one.
That includes land on the west side too. That's the same green.
Okay, we have three kind of green colors. Be more specific, light, medium, or dark.
It's the bright one on the, let's see if I can use my mouse here.
Thank
It's
you.
the bright one.
Number 8, what number? Give us a number.
Yeah, it's number 6.
Right now you're talking.
That includes the top of Fair Mall and the land west of.
Right.
95 and a little bit up. And a lot across from there.
Yeah.
And the Union.
Part. Or actually, it looks like it doesn't include, maybe Justin, will you answer this, but it looks, not the McTee Higby lot, but it looks like it includes Lorraine Darkling's stuff.
Adopted the TIF was existing structures. It's the OPP.
And it looks like it doesn't include the credit union parcel either.
That one I also don't remember off the top of my head.
Although that may be the auto parts were actually.
Yeah, actually, the auto parts.
Yeah, I believe it's with its VIP and stuff.
That's what it's.
But the idea was that
Need
existing
bigger
structures
lenses.
were excluded because there wasn't much expectation of there being anything.
Do you want to do questions at the end or
No, feel free to jump in, I can do both, but feel free to jump in.
help me a little bit? Let's, and take the 100 acres west of. That's in the interchange infrastructure.
Municipal too, yes.
Yeah. There's gonna be development there sometime and it's probably gonna be substantial. It could be more than 50 million, it could be 100 million. Settles in there. What opportunities, what can they work a tip to help them get sewer and water? For example? Well, just, I mean, everybody knows we retired years to do the stuff. TDI has the cost to get sewer and water west side and to do a bunch of improvements on the east side too. Is that something that's in that definition
That tip does allow for sewer and water in the district. So,
in the district?
so this is, land on the west side of 295 as well as the Topsham Fair Mall Road, that's all in the district. So that, the current tip would help fund.
But it's not cash, it's, or is it cash?
Well,
That's what I'm trying to understand, or is it tax relief, is it?
Well, I guess we'll come to that, how the money works, but in essence, it could be cash, but we'd have to raise it in taxes. So in other words, we'd have to, let's say we put something in the budget to put water and sewer on that side. It would be a purpose we could use for the tip. We're gonna have to raise other taxes because revenue we're not capturing right now. is.
But the theory is that it will bring it down more than it went up.
Taxable Topsham is gonna go up, we spend money on water sewer there.
Eventually, the capture of 100 million or 75 million, say that's gonna help when that's built out.
Which was the argument for doing it, yeah.
But it's, I'm just wondering if you could take maybe Bowden Milk, smaller one.
Yeah.
Because there's all sorts of pieces of that tip, right? I can describe it correctly, but like the bridge that got built over to the island.
Yeah.
That was, I think, built by the developer that was using tip funds.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of them coming in as taxes, the developer built the bridge. I don't remember what else was involved in Bodeville Island development. Ways that they were able to actually redevelop that island. But all that, between Sea Dog and all the offices over there. Which, so I just think, and then there were, I don't know what kind of share there was as far as whether it was 50, whatever
You'll
percent.
see in a minute.
But I think the bottom line is that might help us help everyone understand how a tip actually functions. Right?
Yeah, we'll have more, but Justin can answer, we'll have more slides.
Okay.
So when you say that it's TIF money, that keep in mind that any of that money that came from the TIF was tax money in the first place. So it has to be raised and appropriated as tax in your budget.
Right, but I don't think we're raising taxes.
You are.
Well, raising the tax rate.
Yes. This is anything you're reimbursing, even money that you're moving for yourself into a capital to be used for a specific purpose in one of the districts. First has to come from money being generated off as an expense.
Okay, but then, so how does it all net out? Maybe I'm gonna ask it the wrong
Yeah.
way, right?
But if you could hold on,
Let's
let's slide.
Okay, all right.
So these are our current districts. Most of which are gonna be around for at least another 10 years or more, and some for 20, and some for 20. So this is the current balances we have, so this is TIF money that hasn't been spent. So right now, in some of these TIFs, we're not capturing all their value intentionally, and I'll explain that a little more why. But the bypass one, pretty much spend what we take in from it. The Bowden Mill, we've kind of run out of purposes that we can use the money for our share. So we've got 19,000 that we haven't spent there. Where we can use it, which would be a good purpose, is we've committed to the state, we're gonna pay $303,000 for our waterfront park on our share of the bridge construction. So when the time comes to pay that money, instead of using in full the 303,000 we have sitting in the reserve set aside, we use this 19,000 first, and then the balance of it. That'll be a good purpose to use this money and maximize our benefit from the TIF and things.
And then we'll roll the 19,000 forward to the next year, like we just did with the 303, right?
That project will be done, so that would now become unallocated surplus at the end of it. Unless you put it into another reserve fund or something.
District 3 runs up to 82.
Right, so we don't want to have money, they changed the law recently, so you've got to, it's up to 3 years after it expires, you can finish spending it.
Oh, okay.
But in general, you don't want to have money in the TIF when it ends, because then you've got, Justin has to do a bunch of work to change numbers, and we have penalties, because we have to give back the tax benefits we basically had from the TIF.
Did I hear you correctly that we can spend the money up to 3 years after it expires?
Just in the past legislature, they changed it, so I haven't read all the exact, it might be for a project you've identified before it expires or signed up for, but it isn't as hard fast deadline as it was. But one of the reasons, not that it was gonna expire soon, but one of the reasons we wanted to spend the money when we had a good purpose for the Elm Street TIF is because we knew there weren't gonna be a lot of good purposes in the future, so we've got the culvert going in now, and we can justify spending the money on that project, let's do that. We've gotten good benefit from it too. The Frost Street one, that's the one that goes to pay for some of the public safety, so that we've been able to use our money from that one. But the interchange infrastructure one, that one, some of the some of this TIF money was supposed to have paid for Shattuck's salary or the economic development salary, like last year. And because he wasn't here, that money can't go back to the general fund that wasn't spent on that, it has to go back to the TIF. Because we would be violating our agreements if we spent it on something we shouldn't. So that's why that one is climbed in there. But that also, there's been talk about doing improvements on Topsham Mall Road. So that 460,000 for water and sewer. That one, there's plenty of good uses, I think, that could be there for that money. So that one doesn't concern me so much there, because some of those projects we talked about.
Any of these funds transferable between TIFs?
The TIF that is on the number 6 can put money into 9, right? Justin, was it the reverse? Yes.
The interchange can overflow into the transit.
So if we have to first maximize number 9. So we have to capture all the possible revenue and be using it. Then we can pour extra money over from number 6 into number 9. We're not currently doing that because we're not capturing all of the 9 purposes that we need it for.
Is number 6 and number 9, are those tips named by the state or are they named by us?
They were named by Bernstein Short. So when they drafted the TIF documents for us, they called them something.
So what allows it to go from one to the others?
The TIF statute allows certain types of TIFs to pour into another. So
Okay.
when the development plan was written, that was one of the things written in the plan and got approved by the state, approved the town meeting.
So these names don't correlate at all with their purpose.
The 9 one does kind of, because that is a special kind of
Yeah.
TIF and it doesn't count toward the acreage and that is a name. So, and it's supposed to be focused mostly on transit stuff. But that one, so those are the only 2 that have a relationship. I believe Justin Reynolds said it's
I believe that's correct. And to be clear, the numbers in front of them are shorthand, they're literally the number that they're. So it's a shorthand to extensive worksheet. Keep track of purchases.
So the numbers came, so just.
The text is the name, the number is just a shorthand. It's not actually a part of the definition.
When was the most recent? Which one's the most recent? 10?
No, 11, but you don't see on here because there's no balance.
Tax attack.
Because it's the affordable housing one on Chetford Road that hasn't taken effect yet.
Okay, so it's within a year. When was it formed? Right.
Town meeting, we already amended it once. It was town meeting in 2022. Or maybe it was 23. Town meeting 23, and then we came back in November because John needed to take part of the property. But
So not all that long.
that was, the way that was written is that, it wouldn't actually take effect to, John wanted to hold on to get the maximum benefit from it, not have it take effect until we had the property rented or built and rented. So that one will start next budget year. It's not-
Thank you.
So how much is Highland Green Phase 2 contributing in that?
I didn't print that worksheet. So phase 2 has an increment, say around 9 million. They didn't, it was a couple of years, they had the amendment done and they a while to actually cut the streets and start selling the lots. It will see a significant jump next year. There's a lot of units that are this year on job. Essentially, foundation. So for this year, they're only.
As I said, number were pretty low, but they didn't.
Yeah, a lot of the units are in shells. So they were only partially this year. They will jump.
They are kicking in. I understand.
Correct. That district start.
And then, they finish Mountain Road as part of that agreement.
Yeah, part of the TIF agreement was, because it can be more than just sharing percentages. So I talked about the 400,000 was supposed to go to pedestrian improvements. Part of the agreement said that they would finish Mountain Road and give it to us for public road. So that's
True. So some things in a TIF is being set. Change it. Improvements.
Yeah.
So part of the justification for, say, the developer getting that 50% of the tax money is they're gonna build this piece of infrastructure and give it to the town. was Justin that told me that one of the justifications for the higher percentage of the original Highland Green is they had to build that large bridge to cross Topsham Britmall Road. So they all pay for that bridge. Which benefits, sort of the fire protection of people there, because you can get trucks down in both directions instead of having to figure out where the fire is and just come from the right way. All right. Oops. Okay, so this, now we're getting some of the money part. And there may be different perspectives on this, but, at least from Justin and my perspective, TIFs are not free money. You know, I think sometimes we'll have people call up and say, we need bus service in Topsham because we've got a TIF to pay for it. And so you need to do it. And they think there's this magic pot of money sitting there to pay for bus service. And unless it's one of these reserves we just covered, which we don't intentionally collect, they just kind of happen right now, those. Unless it's one of those reserves, there isn't a pot of money just because there's a TIF. So in this case, for these TIFs, the past budget year, we gave $1 million back to the developers of these particular projects. And the share that each one gets is listed on the left. Some of them have been sliding scales over the years, like Highland Green was originally a bigger percentage, right, Justin? Than that.
Yes, bypass Highland Estates in particular, so higher.
And the others are just locked in at the same percentage for the whole thing and stuff. This part, maybe Don knows better than I do, but I suspect that bridge on the boat that goes to the boat and mill to the island, the town didn't pay for the bridge, but that probably justified part of the reason the developer was getting 60% back on the TIF was because they had to build this expensive bridge to connect it. So things like that could be a justification for giving the developer back more as a major piece of infrastructure.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
Liberty Circle included in phase 2?
Liberty Circle, I think, is part of the downtown TIF, if anything. Justin, let's see.
Leave it as soon as our downtown transit omnibus. It is definitely not.
That looks like it's.
The bypass north, which is, I'm sure what to call it, was the original Highland Green. One of its boundaries is, it shares a common boundary. Sure. So it's hard to see on this. You basically have that color and the red one sharing a common boundary. But I believe the Commerce Source Control is actually going to be downtown transit on this one, which is exclusively municipal. There's no money. Any tax revenue in that district is exclusively municipal.
There's been the individual investment in Massachusetts. People have Liberty Circle. How do you
And good. Also the interchange infrastructure one, which is essentially the top of it. Also municipal. We do not return any money to the district. It's exclusively municipal.
Thank you.
So this slide basically just makes the point that we're giving back $1 million in tax. However, we believe the development might not happen without the TIF, so maybe our share of the tax we get it. So each year we figure out how much of the money we're going to use on TIF, because we don't want to get in a situation where we take TIF money and spend it for something we shouldn't. And we also don't necessarily want to build up reserves unless we have a purpose, because as you'll see in another slide, to the extent we're building up TIF reserves, we now have to take other tax money to pay our general expenses. So because the money that, if we shelter the money, so if we use it for an approved purpose, and we're going to get the benefit of shifting some of our county tax burden theoretically and getting more state revenue sharing and more school revenue sharing, we can only spend it on those particular items. So if we don't have any particular item to spend it on, and we're just setting what we do is we use the money for our general stuff and we don't shelter it. And I'll come to an example about that in a minute. But if we think of our town budget as being this amount here, and there's only parts that we're allowed to spend our TIF money on, then we either spend it on that and just put it in our savings account, or we spend it on the things that we can legitimately spend it on, and then we just don't shelter the rest. So we don't get the benefit of perhaps a little more education aid or a little more municipal revenue sharing. But we take that 200,000 that we could have sheltered and we spend it towards the general tax obligation. So it helps pay for the police department and it helps pay for services that can't be done out of the TIF. So if we sheltered all the money, we have to raise other taxes to come up to pay for our general obligations.
The thought is long term, your tax base is going up, so
Right?
spreading it out over a bigger.
Just kind of our philosophy and Derek's and mine has been, we've got a purpose for the TIF. Great, let's shelter that money. But if we don't have a good purpose, the last thing we want is to have reserves being built up, especially if it's, we're never gonna be able to spend them before the TIF expires, and we gotta pay penalties and everything else. Which is like why now we're not sheltering any money from the Elm Street affordable housing, the elder TIF there. Because the only things left we could do with it would be a percentage share of some sidewalks on Elm Street, which is probably the most viable expense out of it. But the sidewalks aren't gonna cost that much, or their percentage. We could do a percentage share of bus system. But where do you get the money to pay for the rest of the bus system? So now we're adding in a new expense to the town that, probably haven't got many riders for. Or the other thing that TIF had paid for, there's a trail that goes from Town Landing Road to the back of that facility. Nice nature trail, but it doesn't need any more work. It's in good shape, or at one point maybe needs a bridge rebuilt, it'll cost $2,000. You know, it's just a wooden bridge 5 feet long. So we didn't shelter money from that TIF this year because we didn't want to build up a reserve that we can't spend. And instead would rather take the taxes that we got from our share of that and just put it toward the general tax. Then it's that much less we have to raise from everyone else. So
Can you use that money there to install EV chargers?
not for that TIF. So this year we could have sheltered up to 300 million of that if we maximized all our TIFs and either spent it on legitimate purposes, or put it into reserves. We could have spent up to 300 million, or we only did 140 million this past year. So that other 160, yes, we could have, perhaps furnished a little more educational aid in a few years, because it's what, a couple years behind.
Yeah, so whatever your state valuation ends up being in a given year, it's 2 years out. State valuation is then used as the formulas for revenue sharing, state aid education, and the state valuation of the county. Figure out that we're 22% percentage of the total.
But that 160 million that we sheltered, we're now gonna raise through taxes to pay for the rest of the budget. Because instead we use that 160 million to pay for other things in the budget.
That would have equated to roughly $1 million additional taxation. If you were actually trying to slide all of
You
that.
sheltered all.
If you sheltered to the maximum districts are generating, it would be additional. Instead of 12. 1330.
So there's certainly a balancing.
Right, yeah, because that's our point. Is, which I think is the next slide, let's see. Next one's my example, but, the slide after that is kind of the point that the maximum economic benefit from the TIF comes when you can use it to pay for things you would have had to pay anyway. Or projects that you decided are important to do, as opposed to just trying to maximize the TIF and putting the money in reserves, unless you have a good project.
So it's not really incremental spending.
So to try to make the example a little better about what I've just tried to explain, these are random numbers, but let's say you have a budget of $1,000, and out of that $1,000, 10 of which can be spent as a allowable TIF expense. And our theoretical TIF has a 50% payment to the developer. This TIF generates $40 in taxes after the developer's been paid. The town retains $10 for just general expenses. Sorry, 10 for the allocated TIF that it's allowed to do, and then $10 is not shown. It's just used to offset general expense. So that results in $980 of the budget has to be raised from taxation other than TIFs. If instead we maximize the TIF, so we protect it as much as we could, we take the original $1,000 budget, the town share, the TIFs, the $20 comes out, because, and 10 of it was put in TIF reserves, but my screen, I guess it's lost my screen, but I don't have a serious one. But then you gotta raise $990 to tax. So if we're maximizing the TIF, but the money's just going into reserves, then we're having to raise extra money from taxes to pay the top bill. Now, the argument on the other side of that might be that, yeah, but we're getting a little more revenue sharing and school aid. I'm sure that's true, but we're not getting dollar for dollar. So we're still gonna end up spending more tax than we're saving on school aid and education. So in order to maximize the benefit of a TIF, again, I think we want to pay for expenses that are allowable and which we plan to do anyway. The culvert there on Winter Street was funded with a considerable amount of TIF money. The Elm Street culvert, the same thing. The Hackensack TIF is a great one, as I mentioned earlier, because we're going to easily use 100% of the sheltered money because we can still use it for education costs. We certainly going to pay a lot more education costs than we get on that TIF.
So basically, like emergency infrastructure projects are ideal use for this.
Yeah, if they're in the right place, you know.
Try to include that every time.
Yes, like for instance, the Pleasant Point Road work we want to do, there's no TIF that we could spend, there's no TIF that encompasses that. Yeah, there's no TIF that's, but,
How many different types of TIFs are there?
there's, basically they're used for economic development. And even the affordable housing board, like more like specific kind of the economic.
And depending on what the TIF is for, depends on what you can do with funds.
Yeah, there's a zillion different combinations you can make, all sorts of different. You know, you can use it on this, you can use it on that. You could give company might pay you taxes, you give company might get, a break taxes as long as they put in street lights. Like that, maybe it can be all in that. Cause that's street lights in, but it's gonna be in that area. So it's whatever your little heart desires, you can throw into a tip.
But
Economic development and housing here.
our current ones are pretty much limited by what's on this sheet, unless we went to amend some. And interestingly, for this property, TIF money was allowed to be used for the Front Street one, for the fire department, but not the police department. So the statute.
Because what?
Because the way the statute's written. So we could use it, say with the community center, we could use it if there's maybe trails connected to it or something. A lot of the TIFs, even some of the existing ones, could go to help support trails. You can't use these current ones with buildings. In the last legislature, they've amended it so you can start to use some TIFs to pay for municipal, actually built, not recreation buildings, municipal buildings. And when this one was built, it couldn't be paid. So this building itself wasn't paid for any TIF funds. It's just the fire part of the public safety building that was paid for TIF funds.
So you gave a town department, say, 5% of the community center as an office, then it becomes municipal.
I don't know, we're trying. Maybe that's where we put our economic development.
You should go out there and make.
Here's where you want to talk to Bernstein, sure.
Yeah. Community center / economic development department. Because that's the one that's, you can use the biggest percentages. Yeah. As Justin said, we want to go with the Bernstein Shore, that one, I think that may be stretching it too much.
So part of this was a discussion with the legislative policy committee. That amended language. It's already come up, maybe not as much clarity in what is allowable. Legislature may have intended, so probably gonna come back. Likely subject to legislature.
So it might give us more communities. and
So stay tuned, I mean, TIFs honestly are something that there's almost always a good limit. it's kind of a moving target. Basically. Yeah.
So when we kind of look at the projects we want to do on the town level, we look to see if there's a way we can maximize the use of our TIF funds. Like the one in our mind right now is the Tenford Road work. Just the Highland Green stuff can help pay for that. And then the park drive sidewalks that are being socialized at this point. And Dave Caplan's gonna for sure be building some of it in front of his facility, but we're thinking we would like the town to finish the sidewalk to actually get to Topsham Road, so you can get from Dan's properties to Market Basket or wherever else. So once that gets a little further, we bring that to the select board. Suggestions and things, but that's good use of TIF money. And then it's in general, again, that's with the money that can be used for water and sewer or besides that.
I'm looking at slide 17 and so where TDI's role comes in. Those four criteria, any one of them. People or developers that have interest in Topsham can maybe the town.
Now, the interesting thing that could happen with the two TIFs we have in the Topsham Green Mall area is probably a developer that wants to go across the highway. We prefer we didn't have a TIF there right now. Because then they could kind of craft the deal with us. We could get it approved. Since we have a currently approved TIF, we're gonna have to try to get it amended to change things.
Is it harder to create one than amend one?
Maybe Justin's got some insights on that, but
I mean, if it is, we just.
And around for the creation is definitely a long involved. And you have to keep in mind that anytime you're creating one or amending one. So you're always subject to the members of the public on board. Even amending one is your feet.
the state probably wouldn't be too anxious. I don't think you can put an overlapping TIF. So it's not like you could have a new one in an area that's already covered in one. So now there is an interesting thing in the one that's the downtown TIF. Is that there's actual language in the TIF that says that the town contemplates that, at some point in the future, it may, for particular parcels, have deals with developers to reallocate things. But that would still have to be approved by the state and go to town meeting, but at least that TIF contemplates that you might do some extra work in a particular parcel. The one that's the interchange TIF, that's the Topsham Road side and the other side, doesn't have that language in it. That one specifically says it doesn't contemplate giving money to developers.
And the omnibus one didn't, the omnibus type didn't exist when the interchange chip was created. And that's part of the result of that kind of issue. Oh, now we have a project that would really be its own separate already in something. So the omnibus at least foresees the idea, maybe you can you don't have to amend the omnibus. You don't have to get the vote to approve the creation of the new district on specific.
So can you use some of that yet to where he was, which would maybe carve off what's on the other side, right?
Unfortunately, the omnibus.
That's what I'm saying. Back to, if you carve off a section of that tip, it's shrink the size of that tip. Create a new tip.
Yeah,
But the
it could be tried. I guess we don't know for sure if it fly or not. Certainly, I think we
It would require an actual amendment. But it does not have that same flexibility.
But a lot of the improvements to get across the river completed in downtown transit district. Pump station, improvements.
Actually,
That
this-
yeah,
one of the things that the select board policy says that the developer agreed to fund the town with the fees to do these things. So that, and then that's something Hodge did for his TIF, is both times the Topsham Housing Authority paid for the town's legal fees on the TIF.
So we have, just under $859,000 in reserves. How much money is like all of it? Like, where do we put that? Reserves?
This year, it's whatever tax money is raised by 140 million, so it's 140 times 1250.
Actually, I may not be understanding the question. The amounts that Mark was showing are balances that are in sheltered after.
Correct.
plan that that there might have been a project coming, the interchange.
Things that you said we definitely knew we would be
Right.
purchasing. and-
Or repaving Topsham.
Right.
Reconfiguring it. So money was put aside at some point in some. Project. It's essentially it's a capital. It can only be used for TIFs. The money that we're not sheltering is just treated as regular tax dollars like anything else. So
And it's listed as tax time.
went into the bottom line of the station. So it's not going anywhere, it's sitting anywhere. It's the general operation.
I mean, looks, if back to the math, Justin, if I take the 140 million that's sheltered this year, divide that by 1,000, and then multiply by the mill rate, comes to 1.75 million. So that would be all our parcels that are in TIF districts. That's how much went to TIF, approved TIF purposes.
Not sure I follow that.
Ian wants to know how much money our TIF, how much money our TIF raised, or we can, or the other shorter answer, we could.
Yeah, so we had about 700,000, give or take, that we actually allocated to something we were going to be spending anyway. Whether it was 10% of administration budget, part of my assessing budget, we allocate every
Yeah,
year.
that's right, because a lot of these would be money, my math didn't include the money back to the developer, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So the 10% of my, 5%, I think, of my assessing department budget, we shelter as TIF expense, because obviously there's time involved in tracking all. So we have about 700,000 that we would have been expending on something anyway this year. Leverage, nothing, finding it at shelter.
I'm not sure I understood you. Just let me ask this question because
Yeah.
this is all new to me. 5% of our budget is what we can put into the right?
No.
Okay, I misunderstood.
can have-
What's the
you can have-
percentage you was talked about?
5% is, you can only have up to 5% of the acreage in your town that can be within a district.
Okay, got it.
Sorry, that's 2.
2% in one particular, 5% total, but also it's 5% of the total valuation
Yeah, that's what,
can't be,
thank you.
you can't, all your original value of your TIF. So that, let's say that John Hodges parcel was worth $300,000 when it was now. That plus all the other original valuation can't exceed 5% of the total assessment of the town, which is 1.8 billion.
Not budget, strictly valuation.
1.8 billion, yeah.
Yes, so those constraints are strictly on the market. It's not on what's actually being budgeted.
Thank you.
And so, but I probably will close with just saying there may be other reasons, or there are other reasons for utilizing TIFs beyond just tax efficiency. You go back to the policy reasons why TIFs were created. So back at the end of the presentation, things like to create jobs, create needed public-private infrastructure, beneficial economic development, or increase housing. We had someone a few years ago for one of the solar farms that came to us and they wanted a TIF. And I got them to admit it, basically just wanted to do it to increase their profit. And we asked them, how many jobs are you gonna create with your TIF? And they said, maybe 2, long term. What was for construction? And so we said, well, you certainly could come try to pitch it to the select group. But, if you're not gonna really be creating any jobs, probably not gonna be something that's, it's just too big a plan.
Common terms, but for TIF.
I'm sorry.
But for a tip will actually happen anyway.
Yeah.
So you don't want to give a tip to Walmart. All you be doing with the tip is maximum.
No, the same thing with single family home development at this point. As far
It
as-
certainly is reaching.
I mean, especially if we're talking about single family home development, it would be subsidizing sewer for them, and it doesn't compute to me with home prices the way they are.
I don't think a residential homes get a tip. The cooperatives are kind of usual case.
It's in multifamily.
You're great.
Yeah, you're more likely from.
Yeah.
But that also makes sense for a lot of those projects because they can't charge market rent. They wouldn't get the financing they need to actually be able to build a project in the first place. A tip to share and leverage.
That's the value of it.
A big part credit enhancement agreements, a lot of what it's doing is not, you're not giving money up front. Basically showing the developer can point to the credit enhancement agreement and show a lender. If we complete this project, we have a guaranteed income stream for years based on tax. So it essentially allows the developer to point to a potential income stream to a lender.
But you take an Amazon, Virginia, when you read what they got from community, the community got everything just because, not because they couldn't have done the project anyway, because of the economic jobs.
And there are a couple of other mechanisms. Taxes, breaking taxes, these are all valuable, all generate. There's pine tree. It's a income. In exchange for.
I did go with a pine tree. I was the last company that got put into the district now. It's a different program. Companies that were in it prior to last year, or grandfathers in 2030.
They replaced it.
Yes, it sucks. Very glad I didn't get it.
So there are some other mechanisms that are very more specific. I think basically like job creation, negating. To be clear, if districts, they're still assessed at full value. Their market value is they're still going to be assessed. They're still going to generate a tax bill. It's more what happens to generated. Is it going directly to costs and municipal expenses, or is it being leveraged into something else? A specific district approved cost.
It was interesting to say that one of the things you can use it for, I didn't notice, I was preparing this, is child and adult care facilities. So you wonder if there wasn't a TIF that somehow could help fund childcare stuff, community centers.
I gotta ask Mark, I'm very not on this. Looking at all of the column headings. Pops up twice. And qualified as needed public infrastructure.
Yeah.
Consider that needed public infrastructure. Recreational trail for biking.
That's the section. It is trails.
Very powerful lobby, that's for sure.
You can do trails with it too, so again, that's what, one of the purposes that the Elm Street one paid for was that trail.
Yeah, and that's a simple column, I get that, but I'm just wondering why bike path explicitly called out as its own category.
And that wasn't, this was my work. I first did this when I first came here, because I was trying to understand the TIFs better myself. So I took all our TIFs and I was just reading the credit enhancement and the development programs. And I was trying to categorize things I was seeing more than once. So it wasn't, these aren't state categories.
Okay.
These are just my analysis.
My brain, all right.
Now you know the inner workings of my brain.
Thank you, Mark. This was helpful.
Yeah.
I'm still a little lost. I have a couple questions. One. Who decides how long TIFs last? Is that a statute or?
Statute has a maximum, which is generally 30 years. But it's then negotiated between the town and the developer.
So it can range anywhere.
Could be for less, but can't equal.
And that would all depend on how much revenue that would bring back in and how that money would get spent.
Or what we think, maybe we're like, no, we really want to have that tax revenue for the town by year 20, so we only want to do 20-year TIF.
So think to ease my confusion on a lot of this, can you walk me through, like, developer comes to the town and wants to do a TIF, brings it in and says it's gonna cost X amount of dollars. Walk me through from how it happens after that. So I hear revenue, but I still don't know where the money comes from. Are we loaning this to developers or giving them a chunk of change to develop land, or is it like a trip with them?
Basically, just giving them the promise that they can have a certain percentage of the taxes that are generated by whatever money they spend on the project. So like the Highland Green one, we haven't really, as Justin was saying, we haven't Highland Green phase 2. We haven't seen a lot of money yet because their building really haven't yet. But we're also not writing them a check back for much yet, because They haven't done much yet.
So there's no initial money up front. Legal costs of setting the program.
That's
Which is
where my
one of
confusion.
the things that we, in recent ones, like, they agreed to pay the legal costs instead of the town actually even putting any money, So they paid for the setup. That's the only initial outlay, the actual creation of the district. There's no money back to the developer to do something. So you could have, and that's part of why we actually have the Highland Green Phase 2, is because with the economic downturn around 2010, they had so much of that area that they didn't actually get developed. They were running for the original district. Several of those parcels, they came to the town and asked if they could move it into another district because they were going to run out of time and never actually get any income. And the town agreed to let them do that. So that district is actually something that wasn't developed. They never got any tax money back from us on that because it never exceeded the original value in the original district. So until they actually do something that increases the parcel and it starts generating. So let's say there's $100,000 in value on a parcel.
Yep.
Taxes being generated by that 100,000. Never have any part of it. It's always deducted out of it. So even if we're only getting, we get 50% back to someone, they wouldn't get any increment with actually increased value on it. Say they've added a structure now, so it's 150,000. That 50,000, that's what's called the increment. So the original assessed value is fixed at whatever it is when the district's created. Then you have an increment above that time as the market develops and is increased on that parcel. Which you're potentially giving back in a credit enhancement agreement is only the taxes generated by that new value started to develop. That baseline 100,000 would always be going into part. Any part.
Got it. So this on a larger scale, you know, if they're doing a multi-million-dollar building,
Yes.
for low-income housing, that value, we just give back to them.
So the ones that were listed that we have credit enhancement, there's some split between the town and the developer. Say that $1 million above what the original. That generates X amount of tax, the same tax rate as any other $1 million property in town that's not in a district. However, there's an obligation of it, whatever the split was, the district was developed, maybe it's 50-50. 50% is keeps, 50% has to be reimbursed for the lifetime of the debt. So each year, so if it generated $10,000 in tax, and it's a 50-50 split, 5,000 of it's going into our obligated as an expense to fund 5,000.
Tax over the base. Tax over.
That's what I'm saying. So let's say that let's say the improvements the district was created are now generating $10,000 a year. If it's a district that's got a 50-50 split, 5,000 of that $10,000 increase will be retained by the town, which we may or may not leverage into something we're going to be spending on otherwise if we have a usable expense. But we're obligated to give 5,000 of that develop on that for maybe as much as 30 years, if that's what the agreement is. And that gets recalculated every year. So next year, time in phase 2, maybe it'll be 300 million in that district next year. We'll have to write a much bigger check next year. We'll get more revenue that we keep too, but we will have a much larger expense.
Does Island 2 go 50-50 for the duration of the TIF? No, Island 1.
Summary worksheet on your laptop.
This is.
I guess the difference is not to pick on Island. You guys have been negotiating these TIF a little, I won't say differently, based on whatever you're negotiating. Right? So some of them may start higher than, but then drop down.
Yeah, so the original one on Highland Estates was originally a 20-year TIF and then it was amended to an additional 10 years on it. Original 20 years, 75.
Beginning.
When it was renegotiated, that's when they added in the steps. The 60 year. That was actually sure we'll give you another 10 years.
So for example, if a developer purchases land and we'll say the taxes on that land is $1,000 for discussion purposes, until.
Where's that? Tell me. Come on out, sir.
Land and tree growth.
Yeah. So as long as they're in the process of developing, they only pay the $1,000 taxes until the project is done?
No,
No, okay.
no, it's so. It would still generate that base $1,000. That's the original assessed value of the district. That. If the mill rate went up, that same, whatever the value was, at that point, might generate $1,500. They still wouldn't get any portion of that. It's not until they actually increase the market value. And then only what the difference is between the original market value of the parcel and the new market. So they only get a share of the increment. So the original money does not go, it's out of the equation, it's deducted.
So with the TIF,
So with your example, $1,000.
Mhm.
Now let's say 2 years have gone by since the district was created and they've added enough. They've added a couple of sheds and now it's a $2,000. It's $1,000 increment. And that's subject to whatever the split is between them.
okay.
They
That makes
will
sense.
always pay the base.
How often are these TIF developer projects reassessed?
One, every year. It's like
Every year.
everything else.
No,
So
good to know.
if that base goes up, they also pay the increase.
They also pay the increase, yeah.
So the real benefit to the developer is that they're going to get an extra revenue, which would allow them to spend less but make more.
So again, a lot of this comes down to benefit development. Is them essentially an income stream that they can go to for their start. I want to outlay $30 million in infrastructure to develop this parcel. But over the lifetime of 30 years, we project we're going to get back 50 million in taxation. So they may not have enough money up front to actually finance the operation, but it's to an alternate revenue stream.
And then they can borrow.
To allow them to is my. However, I've never sat in the developer seat because I feel that thing first.
It is a different scenario. It's not tax related. It's a developer wants to do whatever. And they want the town to build a road. That you can do that, the town can pay for it, but they would have to increase their taxes. You have to get voters to approve to do that, but it could be done. So it was Disneyland at the end of the road or something, residents.
Just to be clear, the district is not creating a TIF district is never a discount on the existing tax base that's already. Always only on new revenue being generated. And the idea is would we ever reach the level of what would be bringing in from a district if they had not had a district to allow them to get their project on? We get significant revenue from the
So
district.
we could basically say, we don't want to, that's an example, we don't want to do any more TIFs. Because that's what we need the most. If that's what
That's true. Yeah.
But essentially that could come down to it because they're gonna, they being a developer are going to seek the town's approval. And we as a select board are gonna choose whether to allow or not to allow that TIF to go through. That's part of
Whether you want to put it in the town, we go for it.
and it goes to town meeting
Town.
after that.
I mean, the plus is, but 2 years from now, the original Highland one's gonna expire. There'll be any more money to pay back to the developer, the town gets 100% of that tax money, and probably isn't a stretch to say Highland wouldn't have happened without that.
Right, okay, so it's up to the town to decide how much ultimately that we want to develop anyway, so if we weren't looking for any more development, say. They could come and ask all they want, and we could say, we're not looking for that, we haven't.
Or the example of market, solar development. The numbers made sense when we gave them.
Yeah,
The real idea we're looking at is maximum.
I'm just wrapping my head around the town giving the benefit to a developer to develop. It's really just because we'll get additional tax revenue
Yeah.
that costs us more to run the town, to go along with what I was saying earlier.
And the idea is that sheltering part of it, you're also leveraging some of the increased valuation. So in theory, you're taking part of that. Let's say it adds $300 million to the tax base. If you're sheltering 50% of it, you're only adding 150 million to the state valuation.
Because you don't send the state the increase in value.
Because the state basically sets that value increase aside. So instead of being at 1.8 billion, 7 billion, which means that in theory, that means you get more of a share of the revenue sharing pot that's coming out, it means that you are less valuable to town. Trying to figure out, should they give you state education, if your state valuation is lower when the county looks at, basically when the county figures out how much of their budget to give to us, they're looking at our state valuation and saying that out of Saginaw County, Topsham is 22% of the total. So we get 22% of the share. I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah.
So in theory, it helps keep that number lower so that we get more from those pots, or we don't owe as much to the county.
But you don't want to spend too much time trying to strategize for those pots, because like this past year, the state got revenue sharing by 250,000.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So really,
One
the
good.
idea is that it leverages, and often the consultants was in the TIF districts. Per dollar return. I personally don't really see that, but you're dealing with so many different state level formulas that we really drove that.
So,
And then layer on top of that, we now have 300 plus districts around the state, which means those are 300 separate districts that all officially reducing the state valuation of all those different communities, which is then shifting that pot around even. So you're diluting the impact of it because there's so many of the districts. So what we're really gaining at the far end is probably some of the different story back in the 90s of the 10 districts in the entire state.
when you say
We had five.
district, those are things that the town sets up that would be conducive for a TIF.
No, actual active districts. So there's currently we have 9.
What's a district? Is it just,
The district is the area within it. So a TIF, tax increment financing district. So that's what a TIF is. It's an area.
so those are the only areas of town that besides those areas?
Those were decided when the TIF district was developed.
So they negotiated between the developers and the town and then approved by the town meeting.
But,
So a developer
but it does.
negotiated for that entire Topsham Fair Mall area and
No,
across.
so keep in mind the Topsham Fair Mall area is a municipal district. There is no developer involved. So that was a TIF district that the municipality set up itself to shelter. So when the mall was starting to be developed, just for around municipality itself decided to initiate a TIF district to potentially shelter us from all of that value. We returned $0 in the infrastructure, which is around Topsham. All the money that
So that-
goes into Topsham.
So what you're saying, it's the way I'm understanding it. All the other benefit to that, the tip is that when we report to the town or to the state how much valuation we're worth, when we enter into a tip district or an area where there's tips that are out over that 30 years, are they locked in at a certain?
Whatever we manage to capture the income.
Yeah.
So there may be like the interchange district. There's far more potential value. It's generating way more tax. Uses to spend, so we're not sheltering.
But we still give the state their share.
Yes, so if we maximize that district, state valuation will be lower. There's more motivation to do it because project cost. It's earmarked for specific things that are allowed in the district. You can only repay Topsham Fair Mall.
So
So
So a developer developed the Topsom Fair Mall, knowing that they wouldn't get any.
Developer's not involved at all. That is a but for, they were gonna build it anyway.
Yeah.
Town saw that they were going to be building something at substantial amounts of tax. Base. That would have driven down revenue sharing, driven down our aid to education at that point. So we worked that. Also to explore development
Because as a
district.
town, if the bigger we are, the less the state gives us. We're trying to balance
In
where
simplest terms, the more valuable we are,
this helps us,
this helps to lay that balloon about.
because it's only whatever that value was when the district was created, doesn't ever go up.
Market baskets in this.
Yeah.
So all the new value for market basket, if we were maximizing that district, wouldn't offset any state education aid things. But we just don't have enough things to spend on.
Yeah, so it's not fixed at the original. We actually have to figure out how much. Every single year. So some of the expenses of that mark was. My example, 10%. Budget.
Thank you guys.
I think it's-
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If my department was. It would be able to show. On the X, they can vary during the whole district. Only the regional base. Because you're calculating on the increment above that base. So for our purposes, for a municipal district, it doesn't matter as much. More worried about the baseline value when you're actually taking part, money being generated, giving it.
So in the Topsom Fair Mall area, when was that TIF started?
99.
But expiration.
I just don't know because of the names. I'm trying to connect them with.
Looks like it could have been as early as 2004.
What happens when that expires? Will you just roll it over again and do
But
it?
we also amended it.
Then you amend it, you also had Village Candle.
Village Candle was a one parcel specific district that you. 15-year district possibly.
Something like.
The shorter term.
And a district is just the area that's being.
District is the geographic dimension. So yes, so it's just a region, any region that is a TIF district.
I don't know what your has.
Development plan
Look what they were able to
associated with
do.
it that had to go through the board,
Got it.
had to go to the town meeting.
Could that be a specific,
People back in.
like a TIF district? Could it be a specific?
They're not always.
Understand your initial number. I was gonna say,
Yeah, okay, that's what I was,
We've had two.
Tail end of it.
One was on Village Candle, which is now we're Smitty.
and that's just that one building or
I don't
block.
remember, what was the store that was originally?
Bradley's.
So when that needed to be redeveloped into something else, they obtained a TIF on it that was specific for just that parcel. And that one has expired, so there's nothing there. We had another one that was a single parcel, postal metal.
Okay.
Down Easter Stand, at one point, there was a TIF district on that, but it's specific to just that parcel.
The rest of these are development plans that.
Yeah, so Bowden Mill, for example, is seven or eight parcels, right? You got the yellow mill, the red mill, and a couple of buildings. So its district is very small, confined to essentially the Bowden Mill Island. And only the parcels that were developed in that district. So when it was created, it was probably one large parcel. Now it's.
And that's one that we share revenues with, that we wouldn't have
Yes.
gotten money for previous.
The ones you see on the map, huge sprawling one, like the one that's off Main Street, that's the municipal one, that's the revenue that we take.
And forgive me, I'm very new to this, so I want to understand it. Then what is the benefit? Can you explain that again? What the benefit to the municipal tips?
So the only benefit to us, the benefit to a municipality, whether it's strictly municipal or credit enhancement agreement, is it delays how much, when new value comes on state application, which as that increases in theory, our insurance. The state aid to education that we get will decrease. Our share of the county budget will increase.
So where's that assessed value? Does that assessed value lock somewhere? So how does it help us with the tax base by lowering it if their value keeps going up? and the taxes keep going up with it.
Because you have a baseline amount, and it's available to the shelter, anything that increases. So let's say the original value.
Yep.
Let's say now it's 200. You could potentially be sheltering 199 million. If we had enough expenses to justify. Costs. So maybe,
Sheltering it is putting it away somewhere for a specific need.
or spending it in the same year.
Yeah.
Often that's what we're doing is because we don't want to build up our fund balance. So often we're allocating on a project we know we're doing that year anyway. It's an allowable. Maybe we're spending $100,000 on street culvert in that fiscal year anyway. It's an allowable use in that district, so we mark it as sheltered funds. We're still raising the same 100,000 one way or the other. Just the idea is that we shelter some of the value that. In addition to the dollar that we're raising in taxes and spending on the culvert, maybe we'll get an additional 25 cents.
So can a state,
Well, your school tax.
so can a town do a municipal zone for like 5 years or 2 years? Or is it wise to do a shorter term?
I would suspect that on the term that short, you would never realize enough benefits to make it worthwhile. I think the district, actually, I think the board. Then taking it to. So a super short term. We didn't even know cost benefit to make it worthwhile.
And going back to the developer side of it, it's really a benefit to the developer more than the town initially to get things done. And the town realizes that after we start seeing our 100% of what they've developed in the town.
The idea is that you're taking land that otherwise might remain stagnant and with no value. Giving it a developer mechanism to obtain the financing they need.
So if we had a swamp in Maine,
With
Topsham,
the prospect.
so could you take swampland or not wetland, but normal land that wouldn't be developed, we'll fill it in and put a trailer park. Would that be a
If it was an allowed,
affordable
if it was
housing?
an allowed use in zoning.
You would say absolutely not.
Right. So the more common thing you see is where you've got something where, again, I'll use an example, the original Highland Estates. Cost of the infrastructure to put the road in, the town is requiring them to have a bridge. So that you get interconnect from both sides, right, for emergency response, right? The developer going to have bridging that comes to $1 million plus. It was a huge outlay initially. That arguably they wouldn't have been able to afford to do before they could even sell it. Spot. So the town had an agreement with them to allow them to make that initial outlay. They could show their lender that, well, we'll have tax revenue coming back as long as we actually complete the project. Whereas in the first couple of years, they might not have any revenue. And the towns agree with the sense that then potentially, well, this land would just be vacant land that maybe it's in tree growth, it's generating $5 a year in tax. Let's help the developer do something so that hopefully we'll have multi-million.
So we do that.
On that one, sir.
There's a nursing home or assisted living in Bridgeton. Town gave the developer 80%. Significant.
Wow.
It's the Woodlands, home there in 302.
But yes, the board could absolutely, if you're looking at a district, it's on board to through the manager, figure out what term you want to give them 80% for the first 4 years instead. All of that stuff is negotiable.
Then if we're doing an affordable housing type of situation, does that count? What is it, like chapter 11?
Well, what were the specifics for the new one you did with John Hutch? That might
50-50.
answer his question. What
50-50.
it's 50/50 and
And we're actually allowed to shelter the revenue towards education costs, which always have SAD 75's tax bill always exceed the amount of revenue that's being generated.
that would be the model he's asking. Other
I mean,
affordable housing.
affordable housing ones are. They're popular both with.
But it's just, the developer still needs to find an affordable housing model where they can build a house to put,
Right,
I mean,
so-
unless they're taking state funding, I guess, and
My
I,
understanding is that there's also often funds that can be leveraged into a project when they have. So often it's not just the TIF revenue. It's as the sole stream of income. If they're an approved housing district, there's often tax credits.
When John did the project on Pleasant Street, he didn't even ask for it. Because he was able to make all the numbers work. But then when he went to do the hackathon one, he was using all his talents to go to every pool of money he could, and he still couldn't make it work. So he said, could you guys help me with a tip? Help me with a tip. But then even then it wasn't, gonna work. So then he had to come back to us for the amendment to take some of the real estate out so we could get his last 200,000 to push him over the.
because I imagine the developer still wants to make money, that's why they're developing, and what we constantly hear is that there's just no way to make affordable housing anymore because of the cost of materials, and just trying to see how a tip would make it all of a sudden more viable for a developer to build affordable housing when they're still trying to make money.
I think it's incremental help.
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way, so the affordable housing developer, show you, they're going to have revenue stream.
They still gotta build it low enough to get revenue from rent.
But it's an additional revenue stream on top of the rents that they may collect. Which on affordable housing, when you don't have market. So it might be rates that you would need to actually. Construction costs, right? They can point to our lender and say, well, this property is also gonna be generating $5,000 a year in tax. You're getting back 50% on top of it. So they can point to a lender, alternate income source, in addition to the rents they expect to generate. Well, they don't get any of that unless they actually build
I'm trying to wrap my mind around the numbers of, if the an affordable building complex that was a multi-unit went in, let's say a 4 unit, and it was valuation of it $1 million, maybe, I don't know what it would cost. They would still take that divided, that mortgage payment and still have to make enough, pay that mortgage payment to their lender. And the $5,000 a year or $7,000 a year in taxes that they would split, let's say it's 50-50, they get 3,500 back in that. These are only up numbers, but
Yeah.
over 30 years, that's not really that much money.
The argument for a project though is that they can't just absorb some control, particularly like median income here. So they have zero control over it. So unlike a private, simply raise rents to absorb costs of additional insurance, property tax, repairs for annual maintenance. When a private developer just has this for rent goes up.
Yeah.
The tenant is the one that has to pay it. An affordable housing district doesn't have that luxury. They're capped at an amount that they have no control. The rents can only be a fixed percentage above median income. So lenders are less likely to lend on that immediately because they have no guarantee that property actually doesn't keep up, because they can't just raise rents.
Well, plus initially, they're not putting the market out at 50% because they don't want profit.
Well, when given it, if I was a developer, and I was
Those
given.
mixed use ones, basically the market price is somewhat subsidizing the affordable.
I mean, is affordable housing, is that credits with, does the state pay for some of that or no?
I'm not sure if there's credits from the state level, the ones the ones I've seen, I haven't dealt. The ones I've seen, it's.
I just don't think it's viable, it's more.
Yeah.
I don't think developers in general want to do it because it's not as profitable.
I would say that I'm not generally a cheerleader for TIF. I'd say that TIF is probably generally very valid arguments.
We're on the same page with everything you just said. Not a huge fan. Affordable housing, yes.
I think they can make it about.
this is just a suggestion, but John Hodges, both the housing authority for Brunswick, but also for Topsham. I don't know if you've had any kind of workshops with him, but he is currently the chair of the Affordable Housing in Brunswick. Recently resigned. New one being formed. Yeah, set up a standing committee. But I think it'd be worth your while to have John Hodge sit down and go through a lot of the scenarios, because that committee's had different agencies, the state and everywhere else, come in to report different programs and different things that are trying to happen. And I'll just say, it's just not one answer that solves everything. And I just sent to John to share with the committee. Some of it gets into some of the banking. If you can find a way to buy down rates. One of our banks around here has just put out a program to do that, which also gets some support, right? Then you can both come up with a payment. You can have a rate that makes that person able to get into it, be able to work at the same time, sustain it, because you can get the rents or mortgage payments down to a reasonable number. So there's a lot of information out there. I'm not the expert. You know that John can tap a bunch of experts. Or you guys have some workshop talk. I think it would help. And it would certainly speed into your discussion.
Yeah, this is all brand new to
Right.
me, and I'm lost in the shuffle of the interweavings of everything, and I'm just trying to make sense as much as I can of it. And it's starting to come together for me. I'm just lost in the idea that if I was a developer and given the two choices, if a town would give me an affordable housing tip or the regular economic development tip, I would take the economic development one every day. It's more profitable. So in that scenario, what motivates them to actually want to do affordable housing?
Well, often their housing authority, like Brunswick Housing Authority, doesn't profit.
Well, and that's,
You're often going to be looking at for affordable housing tip, it's probably a nonprofit. You do projects.
which would be, that would be the answer to those. No, in my mind, I didn't know how to, I just don't know what question to ask because I just don't know what I don't know. And I'm working my way through
Yeah.
all of that confusion.
From that perspective, yeah, it's probably a nonprofit. Affordable housing.
Which would make more sense.
Right, I would, Hodge, Egan, he was CEI, he's now with Genesis. Anyway, there's a number of people, who are pretty good experts on what all is out there and what they trying to do to bring more affordable housing. I think it's worth.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I
Thanks so much, Justin, for all your input tonight. It was really
Yeah, this is
useful.
great. Thanks very much.
This was quite.
Thank you, Mark. That's a good recommendation to get.
Well, Justin, I didn't follow everything.
That was great.
thank you for bearing with all my questions. I have a much better understanding of it still. Fine, like, thank you, but much better.
That's,